You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.
You're listening to Straight to the Extra Point Alma Mater, your Niagara source for all NCAA football news, weekly betting odds, game analysis, race for the college football playoffs, and reactions to the AP Top 25 rankings. Here are your hosts, Brandon Caputo and Treigh Patterson.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another installment of the Straight to the Extra Point Alma Mater podcast right here in the Armchair GM Sports Network, your August 14th, 2021 edition, your source North American sports coverage by sports fans, for sports fans, delivered to you right here in the beautiful Niagara region. You can find us on social media for updates and giveaways by following the podcast on Twitter at Armchair GM Pod, as well as you can like us on Facebook and Instagram. You can listen to us on many platforms, including Spreaker, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Castbox, Deezer, wherever you're getting your podcasts at, you can find us by searching for the Armchair GM Sports Network. And now, obviously, in video form here on YouTube.com. So if you guys are enjoying the video version of the podcast, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button, smashing that like button, and hitting that bell icon for all updates on new videos that are released. Give us some love over there on the video and YouTube side of things, putting a lot of work into the video versions of the podcast. And lastly, our beautiful, user-friendly website, armchairgmsports.com, for all things regarding the network, including articles, podcast episodes, sponsors, and contributors. Everything's on there for you guys. Please go and check that out. We have a new mobile version of it, which is much more user-friendly for people on their mobile devices. And as always, I'm one of your hosts of Straight to the Extra Point Alma Mater. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter right underneath there at Caputs13_AGM with a Canadian Z. And I'm always pleased to be joined by my good friend and co-host of the college football portion on the network. He is the producer for Fox Sports Knoxville's the show called The Blitz, and he's also a contributing writer covering the Tennessee Vols for Fox Sports Knoxville as well. He is the one and only Treigh Patterson. You can follow him on Twitter at Treigh Patterson. Treigh, we're back for episode 2 of our conference previews of the NCAA football season for 2021. Going to cover the Big Ten today.
Yeah, let's get to it. I mean, as of recording today, we are less than 3 weeks away from the week 1 game starting and 2 weeks away from week 0. So, I mean, we're right there.
Treigh, for those college football fans up here in Canada that aren't familiar with it, what do you mean by week 0?
So the official start of college football is September 4th, but you have a couple games that kick off on that Thursday beforehand. So September 2nd is when the first week of games start. But prior to that, it's called week 0. It's an unofficial week of college football where you get some smaller programs that don't really see a lot of national exposure, get some playing time. So like you'll see a team like Hawaii playing in week 0. And then I think you even get a good matchup between like UCLA and another school. And that's 2 weeks away. I mean, we are 2 weeks away from real college football being played.
Yeah, it's always great getting into August and getting ready for September. You got NCAA football and the National Football League starting up, so it's an exciting time for football junkies. So with that said, if you guys missed last week's episode covering the Big 12, that is now live on the channel right now or on demand for you audio listeners. Go and check that one out. Today we're going to be talking about the Big 10 and continuing on with our conference previews here in the next couple of weeks. So Treigh, with that said, let's get into the Big 10. And before recording this episode tonight, you had some breaking news regarding the Big 10 and a couple of the other conferences that might be forming a sort of alliance.
Yeah, so let me see if I can find this tweet again. I don't want to misquote him. But it was essentially that the Big 10, the Pac-12, and the ACC are looking to form somewhat of an alliance together. And when I say alliance, it's got a lot to do with the SEC and the Big 12 kind of not really merging, but the SEC taking the top schools out of the Big 12. So now the rest of the Power 5 conferences are starting to feel threatened. So they're starting to merge together. They want to schedule exclusively with each other, is what it sounds like. Here's the actual tweet. This is as of 9:16 p.m. Eastern Time. Per Adam Rittenberg of ESPN, he tweets, I can confirm a report from Max Olson that the Pac-12, ACC, Big Ten have engaged in preliminary talks about an alliance, likely centered around scheduling. Sources say there's still plenty to work out, but there have been several in-person meetings in the recent days.
Well, what do you think that would do for those three conferences? Obviously, like you mentioned, the Big 12 possibly folding and the SEC taking the big teams from the Big 12. So, do you think this is smart on the other three conferences to kind of not only just make them more credible, but make them more secure as far as so that they don't lose any teams? Because there were talks that the ACC might lose some teams. Is this basically a pact between those three teams to try to make sure that none of those those organizations are going to go to or try to go to the SEC, which again would just break down the entire point of the Power Five?
I think it's good for the Big Ten and the ACC. I honestly, for the life of me, I don't know why anybody would want to align themselves with the Pac-12 right now. That conference is a total sham. Um, they do have new leadership. They got a new commissioner taking over this year, which will hopefully turn things around. But the Pac-12 hasn't made a playoff in, I think, 4 or 5 years. Um, they consistently underperform. Their TV network deals just aren't performing the way the other conferences are. And it's probably got a lot to do with the fact that when their primetime games are kicking off at 7 o'clock on the West Coast, it's 10:30 out on the East Coast, where most people who've been watching college football all day are ready to go to bed and get ready for NFL the next day. So they just haven't really been. They are Power Five, but they haven't been performing like a Power Five conference.
Yeah, and you think
But
the
this
West
could
Coast
be good for the Pac-12 more so than it is the Big Ten or the ACC.
So you think that it would give the Pac-12 more credibility to be involved with those two conferences, if anything?
Absolutely.
So with that said, we don't really know, what's going to go on from that. Any more news on that, we'll kind of update you in the next couple of weeks because we have to cover the ACC and the Pac-12 as the last couple and the SEC as well. So hopefully in the next couple episodes we'll have some updates regarding that if there's anything to come of that. So with that said, we're going to get into some players to watch today from the Big Ten, the standings and the betting odds, things like that. So Trey, let's start off by looking at the last season of the Big Ten, and I have it up on the screen here for the YouTube viewers. Obviously, the West and the East division, they have two divisions here in the Big Ten. So what did you think of last year? Obviously, Ohio State winning the East and Northwestern winning the West as far as the standings went. But what did you think of the Big Ten in general? It was a conference that started late or, was projected to not even happen because of the pandemic, and they were able to get a deal together pretty late, and I guess they started late as well. So there was... one thoughts on if Ohio State would even get into the play or be eligible for the playoffs because of the lack of games they had played, but they were able to kind of get that game limit there exceeded, so they could at least be a part of it with Justin Fields there being the big draw.
Yeah, so the Big Ten was a total mess last year. They came out well before the football season even started or even thought about starting in the middle of the summer, and just flat out said that they were going to be canceling their season. They said that, we're shutting it down. We're not going to have a football season. And I guess they thought that a lot of the other conferences were going to follow suit, and they just wanted to look like the good guys and be the first guys to do it. But as soon as they did that, the SEC came out, and Commissioner Greg Sankey of the SEC said, not so fast. We're having a season whether the Big Ten does or not. So then they kind of got stuck in a dilemma. Oh, do we have a season and go back on our word? Or do we, hold tight and just cancel athletics for the fall semester? Ultimately, they did end up having a season. They settled on an 8-game conference-only schedule, but several teams did not get to play the 8 games. I mean, you look at Ohio State, they only played 5, I think, total conference games. And that was not really, according to their own rules, they had to play in, I think, at least 6 to be eligible for the Big Ten championship, but they made an exception because, it's Ohio State. They weren't about to let Indiana play in the conference championship game and let Ohio State sit out and not give Ohio State a chance at the playoffs. So they did ultimately let Ohio State in. And, of course, Ohio State beat Northwestern, got their spot in the playoff. But, I mean, I see a lot of it the same this year. I don't think they're a great run conference, a greatly run conference, but they do have a top school in Ohio State, and they have some emerging schools in Indiana, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And then you have some powerhouses that are kind of on their way down, like Nebraska and Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the bottom of the East standings there, Michigan and Michigan State. I mean, that's a pretty big rivalry there in college football, and to have those teams be 2-4 and 2-5, I think that's pretty disappointing. But like you mentioned, Indiana, I don't think anybody expected them, Treigh, to finish 6-2 last year. I think that's got to be one of the biggest upsets of the college football season last year was just how good Indiana was.
Yeah, and they started the season off with a pretty big upset against a ranked Penn State team. And that game ended on a crazy, I think it was either a 2-point conversion or a game-winning touchdown as time expired, where Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback for Indiana, was diving for the pylon and was just barely by the skin of his teeth able to get the ball to touch the pylon, which ultimately won the game for him. But yeah, I don't think a lot of people saw Indiana coming out and being as good as they were, especially after they lost to Tennessee in the bowl game the year before. It's kind of fascinating the way that those two teams kind of flip-flopped after the bowl game. Tennessee beats Indiana in that bowl game and then goes on to have an awful 3-7 season. Indiana loses to Tennessee and then goes on to have a 6-1 season in the Big Ten. So it just goes to show you that postseason success doesn't always translate to the next season.
Yeah, and I mean, if we look at the past winners there on the screen as well, Ohio State has won the last 4 Big Ten championships, Treigh. Just, what is it about this program that has made them so successful? We know that Jim Harbaugh was brought into Michigan to kind of take down Ohio State, and he's yet to do that for Michigan. So he still has a job with Michigan, which is shocking to some people. But it looks like Ohio State year in and year out has continued to be the hunted in the Big Ten, and they continue to come out on top.
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at this graphic, and this is the past 10 years, 11 years or so. Mm-hmm. Michigan's not even on here. Michigan, while still a pretty relevant powerhouse team, has not been relevant in the Big Ten in quite some time now. And Harbaugh was supposed to be their savior, and he has failed to defeat Ohio State once in his tenure while there with the Wolverines. But I think that you can contribute the success of Ohio State to two things. Urban Meyer just not building the program up, but putting it at a consistent level to where when Ryan Day took over, he didn't have to rebuild. He was able to just, hit the ground running. So I think you have to credit Urban Meyer. And then I think you have to look at the fact that the rest of the conference just hasn't been as elite as they have in the past. You don't have the elite Penn State teams anymore. Michigan is nowhere close to what they've been known to be in the past. Michigan State is a shell of what they used to be. I mean, you look here, Michigan State's won the conference 3 times in the past 10 years, but then you look at the conference standings and they finished in last overall. So a lot of the competition in the Big Ten is just not what it needs to be in order for it to be very competitive.
Do you think that Ohio State losing a guy like Justin Fields is going to hurt them? We see it with a lot of the big schools. Because they're so good, they lose a ton of top guys to the NFL. Most of them a lot of them are top round draft picks. So what do you think that the loss of Justin Fields will mean for Ohio State, or do you think the program's so good that it'll be next man up at this point?
There's a saying in the South, I guess, about Alabama. They don't rebuild, they reload. And I guess that can kind of, be the same for Ohio State. They don't rebuild. They recruit so well that it's just next man up, we reload. Now, that being said, you can have all the top-end talent on your team that you want. If you don't have a good quarterback, it's not going to translate as well on the field. And we saw that with Jake Fromm at Georgia. Georgia consistently has 5 stars across the field, but when they had Jake Fromm lining up, he was just a game manager. He wasn't a good quarterback. Now imagine that Georgia offense with Justin Fields at quarterback, which, if you didn't know already, was a real possibility. Justin Fields was at Georgia before transferring to Ohio State. Mm-hmm. So Ohio State is going to be okay. It's just going to all depend on how their quarterback comes in and plays. And it's not going to be Quinn McEwers either, who was the top-rated quarterback prospect in this upcoming class. He did enroll early, but he won't be eligible until next year. So this is kind of like an in-between year for Ohio State.
Yeah, let's not forget that he committed to Texas and then said he wasn't going to play and then kind of, decommitted.
Yeah, he was the top recruit in the country from Texas, committed to Texas, then changed his mind. And I think NIL had something to do with that, and that's why he's at Ohio State.
Well, his loss, I guess. But anyways, anything else you want to mention about the Big Ten as far as the conference in general goes? Like, how do you feel about the Big Ten? Because obviously, as an SEC guy, like usually there's at least one team in from the Big Ten that's in the college football playoffs every year, and it's usually Ohio State. But the conference as a whole, do you think that this is a good conference as far as competition goes, or do you think that there's a lot of underperforming schools that could, elevate this conference into, one of the powerhouses other than, the one or two teams that we see every year?
As far as top to bottom talent goes, I think the Big Ten is the second best conference after the SEC. I mean, you look at teams like Iowa. You wouldn't expect Iowa to be good, but they are every year. They are consistent. They might not be a top 10 team, but they always hover around 25 to 15. A team like Northwestern won their division last year. It's a team that you don't really expect to be that good, but you line up and you play against them, they're gonna go nose to nose with you. Michigan is still a team you don't want to play no matter how bad they are, because you just know what they're capable of. You got Ohio State. Maryland's on their way up. Rutgers is on their way up with Greg Schiano. So, I mean, I think that they are a like top to bottom. When you're looking at all the teams, I think they're second best when it comes on Power 5.
And as far as, teams that like Michigan and Michigan State, like I know it was kind of a weird year where they kind of didn't get to play their full schedule, but do you think that there's a chance that they finish at the bottom again in the Big Ten Eastern Conference? I mean, if that happens again for Michigan, you'd think that Jim Harbaugh would have to be reconsidered for that job at Michigan because, again, he's brought in to beat Ohio State. And not only are they not beating Ohio State, they're finishing second last in their division and tied for third last in the entire conference. So I guess that would have to be considered unacceptable if you're a program like Michigan.
No, if they perform badly again this year, Harbaugh's done. I think the only reason they didn't do it this past offseason was, one, because of COVID, and two, because his buyout was so big. I think they're giving him one last shot. I expect them to finish better than they did last year, but I don't expect them to beat Ohio State or Penn State or Indiana.
Yeah, so we'll have to see what goes on with the Big Ten and if Michigan and Michigan State can move their way back up from the bottom, because that's a great rivalry in college football and something you wouldn't expect from those two teams to be at the bottom, especially with the amount of money that those teams put into their program and those great fan bases that come out there for that rivalry and for those games in general. They should definitely not be finishing lower than teams like Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, even though those are some good up-and-coming, well-coached teams. But just goes to show that just because you have a big name doesn't mean you're going to perform well.
Absolutely. And, yeah, there really is no excuse for finishing below Rutgers this year. You can use COVID as an excuse for last year, and some people will give you a pass. But if that happens again, Harbaugh's head's going to be on a stake.
Yep. So we'll see if that comes to fruition or not for Michigan. Hopefully for their fans it does not, but we'll have to see as they try to move their way back up the Eastern Division in the Big Ten. So with that said, we're going to take our commercial break on the show today. We're going to come back and we're going to look at the betting odds for the Big Ten. Trey's going to pick his winner and also pick a dark horse that he might like as far as the betting odds go. And then we're going to finish off with top 5 players to watch from the Big Ten this year. So stay tuned. We'll be right back here on Straight to the Extra Point Alma Mater and right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network.
Experience a new way to play daily fantasy sports and esports on Thrive Fantasy. Thrive's game concept revolves around player props, which are simple over-unders on player stats. There are contests for traditional sports including the NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, and cricket, as well as esports titles including CSGO, Dota 2, League of Legends, and more coming soon. Here's how to play. Choose your lineup of over-unders for top-tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Each prop has a fantasy point total based on how likely it is to hit. The more points the selection is worth, the riskier it is. Rack up the most points and win a share of the prize pool. Thrive is awarded over $2 million in cash, so come and prop up today.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network, the Niagara region's best local source for North American sports podcasting coverage. By sports fans, for sports fans.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to segment 2 of today's Straight to the Extra Point Alma Mater Big Ten Conference Preview Show right here in the Armchair GM Sports Network. Brandon Caputo and Treigh Patterson back with here. And again, guys, if you're enjoying the YouTube side of things, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button, smashing that like button, and hitting that bell icon for all updates on videos that are released on the YouTube side of things. Give us some love over there if you're enjoying the video versions of the podcast. So with that said, Treigh, let's get into the betting odds for the Big Ten this year. And again, it's interesting because, no shock to anybody that Ohio State's leading the way at -170. You got Penn State at +800 in second, Wisconsin third at +900. You got Michigan actually in fourth after a really bad season that we just discussed in the first segment at +1,000. And then going down to the bottom, you got Illinois at +15,000. Purdue at +7,500, and Maryland and Michigan State at +6,000 coming up the rear. So, Treigh, obviously, Ohio State at -170, that doesn't shock you, but what else are you thinking from this betting odds kind of going into this season?
Well, I'll say if you're a big-time gambler, Ohio State at -170 is actually really good odds, I think. I mean, you're going to have to bet $170 to win 100, but I think Ohio State winning this conference is almost a lock. Outside of that, I'm surprised at Michigan being the fourth best odds. I think that's just because of their name. I think a team like Indiana has a much better shot at winning the division or the conference than Michigan does. Now, granted, they do play in the same division, so it's going to be tough for either of them because they're going to have to get past Ohio State. But on the same hand, if Ohio State slips up, say Indiana goes 6-1 or 7-1 in conference, and Ohio State goes 7-1, but Indiana beats Ohio State, that gives them the tiebreaker. Then they wouldn't have to play Ohio State in the championship game. They'd play like a Northwestern or an Iowa, one of the teams from the other divisions. So Indiana being at +2,000, I think, is extremely good value. Michigan being at +1,000 is bait. Don't take it. And Ohio State at -170 is also really good value when you think about who's really the one who runs that conference.
Yeah. What do you think about would you take a chance at any of those bottom teams there?
No. Just no. Maybe throw $5 on Purdue. If I had to choose one, that would be who it is Purdue. But outside of that, maybe Northwestern at 3,000. Nebraska's not doing anything. Rutgers is going to regress this year. Maryland might be a little bit better, but not good enough to come close to winning the division or the championship of that conference. So maybe Purdue if you're just taking a flyer and you got a problem and you just have to bet. But outside of that, no.
So I know they got two divisions, so it's tough. But who would be your top five teams in the Big Ten this year?
So just take divisions out of it.
Yeah.
All right, if you're taking divisions out of it, I'm going Ohio State number 1, Indiana 2,
okay,
Wisconsin 3, Penn State 4,
okay,
Iowa 5.
Wow. You want to give some reasonings on Penn State and Iowa?
I mean, they're just consistent, I guess is the best way to put it. Penn State hasn't been great, like a truly great playoff contending team since Saquon Barkley was there, and Trace McSorley, I think, when he was leading the QB room there. But they're still consistent. They still recruit at a high level. They're able to beat all the bottom tier schools in that division, and they're able to hang with the top tier. So that's why I have Penn State there. And the same goes for Iowa. A lot of people don't, really look a whole lot at Iowa, but they're just another team that they've had stability at the head coaching position. Ferentz has been there for over 20 years, I think. And they're just consistently putting out NFL talent, and everybody just sleeps on them every year. Do I think they're good enough to win the conference? Probably not, but I think they're good enough to give a few teams a couple scares.
And you have Indiana at second, Treigh. Obviously, they had a huge season last year at 6-2. You think that this is a possibility for them to replicate that?
As long as Michael Penix is healthy, I definitely think so. Michael Penix is probably the second best quarterback, maybe to the guy who's returning for Wisconsin. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But Penix is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I don't think he really translates well to the NFL, but when it comes to the college game, I don't know if there's too many players that are better than him.
Okay, so Trey's top 5 teams for the Big Ten this year would be Ohio State at 1, Indiana 2, Wisconsin 3, Penn State 4, and Iowa 5. Again, it's tough because they have 2 different divisions within that conference, so that's basically who he thinks is going to have the best showing this year in the Big Ten. So we'll finish off today with the players to watch, and again, I apologize to the YouTube viewers. I couldn't get the full article up on the screen, so instead I got 3 of the players that are going to be talked about in this top 5 list from gamblingsites.com, Trey. So take it away with the top 5 players to watch in the Big Ten this year.
All right, yes, number 5, you have Aiden Hutchinson. He's a defensive lineman from Michigan. We talk a lot of crap about Michigan and how they haven't performed to their expectations, but they still recruit well. And Aiden Hutchinson's another prime example of that. Last year, he had some pretty good numbers. He had 10 TFLs, tackles for loss, 69 total tackles, nice, and 5 sacks. I mean, as far as defensive linemen go, it's kind of hard to judge them in the college game. But just like that guy who plays for West Virginia that we talked about last week, he's another guy that you got to look out for who could work his way into the first round of the NFL draft.
I like how underneath the stats there it says the job of Jim Harbaugh is at stake. Losses in the prime time aren't helping matters. Harbaugh is yet to win a game as an underdog, 0-11, and has never knocked off an AP top 15 team on the road or a neutral site.
Yeah, that's not good.
So moving on to number 4, we got Tyler Linderbaum, the center from Iowa. And again, offensive lineman.
I'm going to be honest, I do not know who Tyler Linderbaum is.
Yeah, and it's tough with offensive linemen, too. It's not like they have the most tape on them.
But this is what I was talking about with Iowa. They produce NFL talent that nobody really pays attention to. I mean, you had Brandon Treigh, who was a first-round left tackle that came out of Iowa a couple years ago. You had Noah Fant, who's a tight end with the Broncos now. You had the other fella that came out of there who was a tight end the same year as Noah Fant. I can't even think of his name. Who also plays in the NFL.
Hawkinson,
TJ Hawkinson. George Kittle is from Iowa. I mean, they just produce NFL talent that people don't hear of while they're in college, and this is probably another guy.
And yeah, apparently he is the best bets among players to challenge for the Remington Award given to the best center. So it looks like this guy's going to be a keeper, and like you said, he might translate well as an NFL prospect in the draft. We'll have to see, but again, Iowa flies under the radar in that regard. Moving on to number 3, we've got the quarterback from Indiana, like you mentioned, Michael Penix.
Yeah, Michael Penix. This is a guy that is just electric, extremely fun to watch. He reminds me a lot of the way Lamar Jackson plays. And that's why I say I don't know if it'll translate well to the NFL. Lamar Jackson has translated to the NFL, but I don't know. Not everybody's going to be able to do what Lamar Jackson does at the most elite level. But regardless, this guy is a lot of fun to watch. He's got a great arm, and he's very shifty behind the line. There's a reason that I picked Indiana to be number 2 in the conference, and this guy's the sole reason why.
You look at the stats that gamblingsites.com put up here. His 3 games against, I guess you could say, the powerhouse schools in the Big Ten. At Ohio State, he threw for 491 yards and 5 touchdowns to only 1 pick. That's pretty incredible against a great Ohio State team. Against Michigan, he threw for 342 yards and 3 touchdowns, no picks. And then versus Penn State, he had 2 touchdowns as well. So against the 3, I guess, big schools there, he put up 10 touchdowns to 1 INT. So that's pretty impressive, especially for a guy playing at Indiana.
Oh, yeah. And if I remember correctly, that Indiana-Ohio State game last year came down to the wire. And we might get another showing just like that this year.
Yep. So we'll see if he's going to be the quarterback of the Big Ten this year. We'll have to see if he really has any challengers in that regard. But moving on, number 2 and number 1 are interesting. They're both wide receivers, both from the same team. But starting off with number 2, we got Garrett Wilson from Ohio State.
Yeah, so we talked earlier about we don't know how the quarterback situation is going to look at Ohio State. When you have guys like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave or Olav or however you say his name, I'm not entirely sure, it's going to make their job a lot easier. It's got his stats from last year. He had 43 catches with 720 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. And you got to think, too, I think he was the number 3 or 4 guy on the depth chart last year. So that's saying something for Garrett Wilson. Ohio State just recruits at an insane level. They're like I think they're currently number one when you look at the recruiting rankings for 2022, and they're consistently top three. And when you're consistently top three, you're going to have guys like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olav.
Do you think Ryan Day has kind of, exceeded expectations, taken over from Urban Meyer in that regard as a great recruiter himself, or do you think that he's kind of just used that momentum left from Urban Meyer to kind of continue on here with this Ohio State program?
I would be hard-pressed to say that I think a lot of it is the momentum that Urban left. I think if you take Ryan Day and you put him at a school like, say, Tennessee, for example, I don't think he has nearly the amount of success he's having. I don't think the recruiting comes as easy. I think the recruiting is easy because you're at a school like Ohio State. People know you come to Ohio State to win the Big Ten because nobody else can compete with Ohio State. I don't know. It's not like with Nick Saban when he took over Alabama. He took over a losing program and went 6-6 in his first year before winning a national championship in his second or third year, whatever year it was. Ryan Day was handed the keys to a gold mine and just kept it flourishing, which, I mean, you got to give him credit. He didn't let it fall apart, but, I mean, I don't think a lot of this is his doing.
And moving on here to the last one on the list, like you mentioned, Chris Olav, the wide receiver from Ohio State. Again, he's had some impressive games there, Treigh, last season against some really good schools.
Yeah, he did, and I expect him to do the same this year. Chris Olav might be the best receiver in all of college football, not just the Big Ten. I mean, you look at some of his stats from some of the key games he played in last year. Against Indiana, he had 101 yards. Michigan State, he had 140 and a touchdown. Against Clemson in the college football semifinal playoff game, he had 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then against Alabama, he only had 69 yards. But, I mean, nice, but that's Alabama, you know.
Yeah.
Not much you can't really knock him for not having a great game against Alabama. But, yeah, I mean, he balled out last year. I expect him to do the same.
He missed the Big Ten title game last season as well. So if you were a betting man, who do you think is going to win the MVP of the Big Ten this year? Do you think it's going to be Chris Olav, or do you think how highly you've been talking about Michael Penix? If Indiana has another good showing this year, do you think that he's going to be the Big Ten Player of the Year?
Yeah, if I'm putting money on it right now, I'm going Michael Penix just because they're more likely to choose a quarterback, and I think if Penix can lead Indiana to a 10-win season and a regular season schedule, I don't see how you cannot give it to him. With as irrelevant as Indiana has been in recent memory, I think you'd have to give it to Michael Penix.
Yeah, for a guy to bring a program up like that to at least a respectable level, I think shows the talent that they have in this guy, and it would be nice to keep him around as long as they can before he trying to makes that transition to the NFL. Like you mentioned, we'll see if he's gonna make it in the NFL, but it looks like at this point he'll at least be some sort of prospect for somebody, especially if he could somehow win the Big Ten Player of the Year. But other than that, it's basically it for the Big Ten. Treigh, you got any final thoughts on this conference before we wrap it up?
Not a whole lot. I'm looking forward to seeing how they play this year. The Big Ten plays a different style of football than a lot of other conferences do. Most conferences now are just like slinging it, gun style offense. They want to throw all over the field, whereas the Big Ten still has a lot of that old school 3 yards in a cloud of dust, style of football left. So they're fun to watch. The defenses are usually pretty good in the Big Ten, and it's just big boy smash mouth football, and I really enjoy watching it. So I'm excited to see how it's all going to play out.
And do you think with a full season again, they came in late last year? Do you think that this conference has the ability to possibly have 2 teams that make it to the college football playoffs, or do you really think that it's Ohio State or bust at this point?
I don't see 2 teams making it, and that's not a knock on the Big Ten. I just think that they only have one truly elite team, and I think the playoff knows that. Now, if Indiana goes out and wins the conference somehow and finishes 10-1, 10-2 with a Big Ten championship on their resume, I think they make the playoffs, and you might see Ohio State out, but I don't see any way that there are 2 teams getting in.
And if you're a betting man, do you think that Michigan bounces back this year, or do you think that this is going to be another down season and it might be the end of the Harbaugh era up there in Michigan?
No way. He's done.
You think
this
he's
is
done?
it?
Okay.
I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. I'm not. It's just he's failed miserably up there, and I know he's probably sick because he's an alum of Michigan. He played there. He loves the university, and he was beloved by the fans. And now he's going to leave with a black stain on his resume there.
Yikes! What a way to end the show there with the Jim Harbaugh slander. But again, it is what it is. Yes, he's brought in to beat Ohio State, and he hasn't done it. He hasn't even been close. And They finished second last in their division.
I mean, he's still struggling against Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan State. I mean, it's been a mess.
Yep. So we'll have to see if it's going to be Ohio State's conference again for a fifth straight year, or if another team can kind of rise up here and take it from them. But other than that, I think that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Make sure you stay tuned for next week. We'll have another division preview for you guys. We still got to do the ACC, the Pac-12, and the SEC. Couple weeks, like Treigh mentioned, before we get the start of college football. So hopefully you guys are getting revved up and getting excited for college football, like I know Treigh is, and me to a certain extent here up in Canada as well. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Straight to the Extra Point Alma Mater, right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network, your source North American sports coverage by sports fans and for sports fans, delivered to you right here in the beautiful Niagara region. As always, I'm one of your hosts of this podcast. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter right underneath at Caputs13_AGM, and as well you can follow my co-host Treigh at Treigh Patterson. Make sure you're checking out his work over there at Fox Sports Knoxville and the show that he produces and co-hosts called The Blitz. Treigh, where can they find that show at?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think too many of your listeners are going to be in the local market, so we are on the radio. It's AM 1340 in the Knoxville area, FM 105.7, but we have an app. It's the Fan Run Radio app. You can listen through there, or you can go to foxsportsknoxville.com and listen to the live stream there. We're on from 10 a.m. until 12 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then the website also has a whole bunch of articles and stuff that get written out. It'll be getting live again here pretty soon. Once football starts up, a lot more articles will be popping out.
Perfect. So a big thank you to all of our sponsors, help put us on, support the network, keeping the show on the air, and to you viewers out there and college football junkies for tuning in and listening along for this episode. And once again, if you're liking the YouTube version of the podcast, make sure you're hitting the subscribe button, hitting that like button, and smashing that bell icon for all updates on videos that will be released just like this one. And for our next conference preview shows, you're going to want to stay up to date with those as well. And once again, this is Straight to the Extra Point Alma Mater on the Armchair GM Sports Network by sports fans for sports fans. We'll see you guys next week. You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.